Hi everyone, welcome back to our channel. Bex here today to do a review on the story of Edgar Sawtelle by David Wroblewski. This book has been on my TBR shelf for a long time, and the reason I finally picked it up was because Les chose it for me to read for the Shelf Sisters series. The story of Edgar Sawtelle follows Edgar, who is a young teenager growing up in the 1970s. He's born mute, and so he communicates with his family using sign language. He lives with his mom and dad on a farm in rural Wisconsin, and his family raises and trains this breed of dog, a fictional breed of dog that's known for its intelligence. Edgar's best friend is one of those dogs. Her name is Almondine, and Almondine has been around since Edgar was born. The plot gets going when Edgar's uncle, his father's brother, shows up after being gone for many years, and Edgar's father and uncle start to butt heads and tensions rise in Edgar's mostly idyllic life. I'm stopping my summary here, even though the inside flap of this book has a lot more in it, just because the events that it talks about happen more than 50% of the way through the book, which is a no-no in my opinion. Like, if you have to do that, if you have to give away that much plot to get somebody to pick up this book, that's not a good sign. I'm just gonna start off by saying that I gave this book 2 out of 5 stars, which is not good. The summary on the inside flap of this book made it sound way more interesting than it actually was. But before I get into all the reasons why I didn't like it, I at least want to mention the few things that I did like. The first of which was the author's writing style. It is very good, and I thought he was particularly good at describing settings and the surroundings that the characters were in, to the point where you really felt like you were there as well. The weather, the snow, the heat, the storm, it was really well done in that sense. I also really enjoyed Edgar as a main character. You do follow a couple other perspectives in the book, but the majority of it is spent following Edgar, and I felt like his decisions made sense for a young teenage boy and what was happening around him and his mental state. I was always rooting for him, and I always wanted things to work out for him. And the other thing that I did like was the personalities of the dogs. Because his family raises a bunch, you hear a lot of different names, but there are some dogs that you spend more time with and focus on, and hearing their personalities was cute and enjoyable. And then also Edgar and Almondine's bond, because she's been next to him since birth. They just have that deep connection that some people have with other human beings and some people have with their animals, and that was really nice to read about. Now for what I didn't like about this book. So remember when I was summarizing the plot earlier and I said that this gets going when Edgar's uncle shows up? When I say the plot gets going, I mean it goes from 0 miles per hour to 20 miles per hour. It is slow. There are brief moments of excitement and interest in this book, but unfortunately that synopsis, which I read before I read the book, gives away pretty much every interesting thing that happens, so there wasn't that much to look forward to, and I was slowly realizing that as I kept going. This book is at least 100 pages too long. There's way too much focus on mundane details. If you're somebody that wants to read about training dogs, this wouldn't be the first book that you would pick up. You'd probably find a nonfiction book about training dogs, but there was a lot of that in here. There was also a lot of daily life, and that's obviously important to a certain extent. You have to set the scene, you have to understand how Edgar grew up, what his family life is like, and it is useful, but it was way too much. There could have been so much of that cut out, and it still would have been a good story, and it wouldn't have been nearly as long. Another thing that I didn't like was the fact that there were a few minor characters that were focused on in their relationship to Edgar, and I thought they were going to be more relevant to the story overall. There's this build-up with a stray dog that Edgar and his father see on the edge of their property, and They're trying to coax it to come to them. Edgar's father and his uncle butt heads about how to deal with the dog, and Edgar even spends a night trying to bond with it by leaving out food and trying to get it to come closer and closer to him. And I thought that that dog was going to be relevant later on in the plot, maybe become a friend of Edgar's, something like that, and just nothing. Like, it was mentioned once again, maybe twice, but in passing, and it just, I didn't understand why we spent so much time on that for it not to become relevant. And that was just one of the examples. There were a few others where the characters had this really intense moment with him and then nothing came of it, and that just seemed weird to me. Another thing that seemed weird to me was the fabulism that was sprinkled throughout this book. It only ever seemed to really happen when we were following Edgar, but he would have these moments where things would happen to him, and it was very obviously fabulism, but at the same time I wasn't sure how I was supposed to interpret it, as in, is Edgar actually seeing this thing and there's this little bit of paranormal element to the story, or is this all in his head? And I just wasn't sure how to take it, and even after finishing that passage and thinking about it, I was still just confused and I didn't really understand the point of it. There was one moment towards the end of the book where Edgar's kind of going through this thing, and it makes sense in that moment because he's obviously very confused. But otherwise, he would just be doing something, like he was cleaning out a barn, and then this thing would happen. He would see this man, and it was a ghost, I think. Like, was it actually a ghost or was it in his head? I really don't understand. And he was like talking to him. Like he was signing to the man and the man was answering, but only when he didn't look at him. It was very, I don't know, I didn't understand why that even needed to be in there, especially that particular point. With all that being said, there was one thing in this book that really angered me to the point where I couldn't give it more than 2 stars, and that was the ending. I'm the kind of person that can be swayed by an ending. If I'm feeling so-so about the book and the ending really wraps things up nicely or something dramatic happens and it pulls you in, I love a good ending. I'm a sucker for a good ending. So when that can happen in a book, it can bump it up half a star. However, in this case, it was the opposite. The ending was awful, and it made me angry because I have invested my time in reading this book that is over 500 pages, and you give me this ending that has no satisfaction to it at all, and it also almost makes the entire story pointless. The only reason it didn't feel completely pointless was because of Edgar, because I like his character and I wanted things to turn out well for him. As I was reading it, getting to the end, and I started realizing what was going to happen, I just started getting so mad, and just combining that with all the other smaller things that I didn't like as much, it just totally turned me off from this book. So that's why it's a 2 out of 5 stars. There were those little things that I liked, but everything else was just too much, and that ending was like the cherry on top for just not liking this book at all. I almost DNF'd it multiple times, and there were 2 reasons why I didn't. The first was because Les picked this book out for me to read, so I wanted to finish it. And the other was because one of my reading goals for this year is to read some 500+ page books that have been on my TBR bookshelf for a long time, and this is one of those books. So at least, because I finished it, I can review it here for you, and I can move further in my reading goal. But otherwise, I would, if I just picked this book up just to read it, I would have DNF'd it. Based on my reading experience with this book, I would not recommend it to anybody. I'd say if you've been thinking about reading this book, it's sitting on your shelves and you're not sure, there are 3 criteria that you need to meet if reading this book is going to be worth it for you. The first thing is that you need to be a fan of literary fiction. The second is that you need to be okay with a book that doesn't have a ton of plot and is much more focused on the characters. And you need to be someone that is okay with an ending that is not satisfactory. If you don't meet all 3, I really don't think this book is going to be for you. I mean, it was just, it's a read at your own risk kind of book. I'm not going to recommend it to you, but if everything I've said about this kind of makes you more interested in reading it, you can read it at your own risk. those are my thoughts on the story of Edgar Sawtelle. Let me know if you've read it. It is a New York Times bestseller and an Oprah's book club selection, so obviously somebody out there liked it. Let me know if that was you. If you have any questions or thoughts on my comments on the book, let me know down below. As always, all of our links are in the down bar. You can go check those out if you feel so inclined. Thank you guys very much for watching, and I'll see you later.